U.S. National Guard troops block off Beale Street in Memphis, Tennessee, as civil rights marchers wearing placards reading, "I am a man" passed by on March 29, 1968. It was the third consecutive march held by the group in as many days. Bettmann, Getty read more. The Supremes, with Diana Ross, front, Cindy Bird, and Mary Wilson dance with their arms in the air as they perform at the annual Ballpair Party in Munich, West Germany, on January 21, 1968. The American trio was backed by the West German Rolf Hans Müller Big Band, and was celebrated with thundering applause. Frings, AP read more. The flag of South Vietnam flies atop a tower of the main fortified structure in the old citadel as a jeep crosses a bridge over a moat in Hue during the Tet Offensive in February of 1968. AP read more. South Vietnamese General Nguyen Ngoc Loan, chief of the National Police, fires his pistol, executing suspected Viet Cong officer Nguyen Van Lem, also known as Bay Lop, on a Saigon street on February 1, 1968, early in the Tet Offensive. Lem was suspected of commanding a death squad which had targeted South Vietnamese police officers that day. The fame of this photo led to a life of infamy for Nguyen Ngoc Loan, who quietly moved to the United States in 1975 and opened a pizza shop in Virginia. Eddie Adams, AP read more. A U.S. Marine with several days of beard growth sits in a helicopter on July 18, 1968, after being picked up from a landing zone near Con Thien on the southern edge of the demilitarized zone in South Vietnam. His unit had just been relieved of duty after patrolling the region around the DMZ. Stone, AP read more. A speaker addresses a mass rally in support of democracy organized by the youth of Prague at the Old Town Square in Prague, Czechoslovakia, on May 18, 1968. During a period called the Prague Spring, Alexander Dubček, the newly elected leader of the Warsaw Pact nation, enacted numerous reforms loosening state control and expanding individual rights, which both encouraged citizens and angered the Soviet Union. Bettmann, Getty read more. By late summer, talks between the Soviets and Czech leaders were not going the way the Kremlin wanted, so more than 2,000 tanks and thousands more Warsaw Pact troops invaded and occupied the country in August. This column of Soviet tanks was lined up in a street in Prague, Czechoslovakia, near the Old Town Square, on August 28, 1968, after Czech leaders had returned from negotiations with the Russians. Deether and Liquor, AP read more. Prague residents surround Soviet tanks in front of the Czechoslovak radio station building in central Prague during the first day of a Soviet-led invasion of Czechoslovakia on August 21, 1968. Within a year, Dubček was removed from office, his reforms were undone, and a more Soviet-controlled government was installed. Lieber Hodgski, Reuters read more. American figure skater Peggy Fleming practices on an outside rink on February 1968 in Grenoble, in the French Alps, during the 1968 Winter Olympic Games. Fleming took the gold medal in women's figure skating. AFP, Getty read more. Fashion in 1968. Left, a male model wears a silk jersey print pajama leisure suit, sandals, and a necklace at a fashion show in New York on January 9. The show was entitled Clothing for the Emancipated Man. Center, a sculpted silver necklace designed by Pierre Cardin features a diamond worth $60,000. The necklace is built into the halter that is part of a long black crepe evening gown presented in his spring collection in Paris, France, in February. Right, a cocktail dress of printed pure silk with a skirt, a creation by the Fontana Sisters fashion house of Rome, to be presented at the upcoming Italian Spring-Summer Ready-to-Wear fashion show that opened in Florence on November 6, 1968. AP, Mario Torrisi, AP read more. One of the last pictures to be taken of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as he spoke to a mass rally in Memphis on April 3, saying he would not halt his plans for a massive demonstration scheduled for April 8 in spite of a federal injunction. Bettmann, Getty read more. Civil rights leader Andrew Young left and others stand on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel pointing in the direction of an assailant after the assassination of civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who is lying at their feet, in Memphis, Tennessee, on April 4, 1968. Joseph Liu, The Life Images Collection, Getty read more. This aerial view shows clouds of smoke rising from burning buildings in northeast Washington, D.C., on April 5, 1968. The fires resulted from rioting and demonstrations after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. AP read more. Firemen battle ablaze on 125th Street in Harlem, New York, on April 4, 1968, after a furniture store and other buildings were set on fire after it was learned that civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. AP read more. President Johnson called federal troops into the nation's capital to restore peace after a day of arson, looting, and violence on April 5, 1968. Here, a trooper stands guard in the street as another left patrols a completely demolished building. Bettmann, Getty Read More. Coretta Scott King, the widow of Martin Luther King Jr., walks on the arm of Dr. Ralph Abernathy, her husband's successor as head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, leading about 10,000 people in a memorial march to the slain Dr. King. The King children, Yolanda, Martin III, and Dexter, are at left with Harry Belafonte. Reverend Andrew Young marches next to Dr. Abernathy. Bettmann, Getty Read More. Original caption, Dr. Timothy Leary holds a conference in New York City on February 21, 1968. The LSD advocate said he is tuning in with peaceniks and yippies and hopes to have 1 million young people in Chicago during the Democratic Party's convention in August. He said he hopes they will disrupt the convention through flower guerrilla warfare. At left is Abby Hoffman, who said he is an organizer, and at right is Jerry Rubin, peace movement worker. AP Read More. 1968 was truly a year of protest around the world. Here in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, state police cavalry charged students attending a memorial mass for Edson Luiz de Lima Sudo, a student killed by police, at Candelaria Church on April 4, 1968. Edson had been part of an earlier protest over high prices in a restaurant in downtown Rio, and was shot by police who were trying to remove students from premises. Agência JB, AP Read More. Violent clashes between policemen and students take place during the May 1968 protests in Paris, France. Editor's note: this photo replaces a previous image in this position that had been mislabeled by the source, Jacques Halo, APIs, Sigma via Getty Read More. A massive anti-Vietnam War demonstration in London. On March 18, 1968, hundreds were arrested as they demonstrated outside the United States Embassy. Corbis via Getty Read More. Demonstrators march on Washington, D.C., during the Poor People's Campaign Solidarity Day on June 19, 1968. Charles Tasnadi, AP Read More. The Beatles pose together on February 28, 1968. From left are Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison. This was the year they released the White Album. AP Read More. American actor Gary Lockwood on the set of 2001, A Space Odyssey, written and directed by Stanley Kubrick. The groundbreaking film premiered in April of 1968, and earned the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. Sunset Boulevard, Corbis via Getty Read More. A propaganda image from China's Cultural Revolution. In 1968, China was in a phase of their Cultural Revolution where Chairman Mao Zedong's cult of personality was still being elevated, and intellectuals and disloyal citizens were being forced into labor camps, or exiled to remote farming regions. Original caption, members of the Sichuan Province Revolving Committee unite with civilians and soldiers to work in the fields on August 26, 1968. API, Gamma Rafo via Getty Read More. Federal Nigerian troops walk along a road near Ikotekpene, Nigeria, to the frontier with Biafra, a few miles away, on October 13, 1968. On the roadside, 2 emaciated Nigerian boys slowly die from starvation and malnutrition. Biafra was a breakaway state within Nigeria that fought a war for independence from 1967 to 1970, ending after years of fighting, and a crippling blockade by Nigeria resulted in the deaths of between 500,000 and 2 million Biafran civilians by starvation. Dennis Lee Royal, AP Read More. Original caption, A Feminine First. Mexico City, Mexico's Norma Enriqueta Basilio, the first woman in the history of the modern Olympic Games to light the Olympic fire, runs up the 90 steps with the Olympic torch during the opening ceremonies here on October 12, 1968. Bettmann, Getty Read More. Tommy Smith and John Carlos, gold and bronze medalists in the 200-meter run at the 1968 Olympic Games, engage in a victory stand protest against unfair treatment of blacks in the United States. With heads lowered and black-gloved fists raised in the Black Power salute, they refused to recognize the American flag and national anthem. Australian Peter Norman is the silver medalist. Bettmann, Getty Read More. Senator Robert F. Kennedy is surrounded by hundreds of people as he leans down to shake hands during a presidential campaign appearance at a street corner in central Philadelphia on April 2, 1968. Kennedy had declared his candidacy for the presidency of the United States only weeks earlier, on March 16. AP Read More. Senator Robert Kennedy lies sprawled, semi-conscious in his own blood after being shot in the head and neck while busboy Juan Romero tries to comfort him in kitchen in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California, on June 5, 1968. A Palestinian immigrant named Saran, who was angry with Kennedy over his support for Israel, shot Kennedy 3 times. Saran remains in prison to this day, last denied parole in 2016. Bill Upridge, The Life Picture Collection, Getty Read More. Coretta Scott King, widow of Martin Luther King Jr., walks past the casket containing the body of the assassinated Senator Robert F. Kennedy in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City on June 7, 1968. Bettmann, Getty Read More. A large crowd lines railroad tracks as the funeral train of Robert F. Kennedy passes on its way to Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Bettmann, Getty Read More. Youths prepare to board buses for Chicago in August of 1968. Peace activists and anti-war groups organized to travel to Chicago to demonstrate outside the 1968 Democratic National Convention. AP Read More. Police and demonstrators clash near the Conrad Hilton Hotel on Chicago's Michigan Avenue August 28, 1968. During the Democratic National Convention, Bettmann, Getty Read More. Mike Wallace, a CBS News man, is hustled off the Democratic National Convention floor in the aftermath of a row between delegates and security officers during the nominating session on August 28, 1968 in Chicago. He was taken up a ramp to a second-floor room. AP Read More. Vice President Hubert Humphrey and his running mate, Sen. Edmund S. Muskie, with their wives shown at the final session Democratic Convention in Chicago following their nominations for President and Vice President, on August 29, 1968. AP Read More. Members of the Black Panthers gather in front of entrance to the Alameda County Courthouse in Oakland, California, on July 15, 1968, to protest the trial of Huey Newton, 26, the founder of the Black Panthers. Newton went on trial for the slaying of an Oakland policeman, and for wounding another officer on October 28. Ernest K. Bennett, AP Read More. Original caption, Miami policeman, one holding the man's arm and the other with an arm lock on his neck, drag away a Negro youth during a clash between police and rioters in that city's predominantly Negro Liberty City district on August 8, 1968. Bettmann, Getty Read More. Helicopters fly low during Operation Pegasus in Vietnam on April 5, 1968. They were taking part in the operation to relieve the KHE San Marine base, which had been under siege for the previous 3 months. Dang Van Phuoc, AP Read More. Evidence of the My Lai massacre. A photograph of Vietnamese women and children in My Lai before they were killed by U.S. soldiers in the massacre on March 16, 1968. According to court testimony, they were killed seconds after the photo was taken. The woman on the right is adjusting her blouse buttons because of a UAL assault that happened before the massacre. Image taken from Volume 3, Book 6, of the Report of the Department of the Army Review of the Preliminary Investigations into the My Lai Incident, photographed by United States Army photographer Ronald L. Hebrel. Ronald L. Hebrel, U.S. Army. Read More. A U.S. Marine keeps his head low as he drags a wounded buddy from the ruins of the Citadel's outer wall during the Battle of Hue in Vietnam on February 16, 1968. Bettmann, Getty Read More. United States President Lyndon B. Johnson listens to a tape recording from his son-in-law Captain Charles Robb at the White House on July 31, 1968. Robb was a U.S. Marine Corps company commander in Vietnam at the time. Robb was later awarded the Bronze Star and, after returning home, became governor of Virginia in 1982, and later a senator for the same state. Jack Heitlinger, AP Read More. Original caption, several hundred hippies gathered at Hippie Hill in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park for a happening at which several bands played rock and roll. Most of the hippies sat and listened, but some just couldn't keep from dancing to the rhythms. Bettmann, Getty Read More. Mexican Army soldiers crouch with weapons ready in Mexico City's Tlaxcala district, in this October 2, 1968 photo. The truth behind the stunning assault on a peaceful democracy protest known as the Tlaxcala Massacre, in which some 300 people are believed to have been killed, remains largely hidden by government and military secrecy. AP Read More. Soldiers cut a student's hair after he was arrested during the first hour and a half of shooting in the Tlaxcala area in Mexico City on October 3, 1968. Another student stands against the wall. AP Read More. SRI's Bill English, the engineer who built the first computer mouse prototype, prepares for the December 9, 1968 Mother of All Demos. The demonstration is hailed as one of the most significant technological presentations in history, showcasing technologies that have become what we now know as modern computing. He gave the first public demonstration of a computer mouse, a graphical user interface, windowed computing, hypertext word processing, video conferencing, and much more. Shri International. Read More. Richard M. Nixon is mobbed by wildly cheering supporters as he arrives at the Hilton Plaza Hotel, his Miami Beach headquarters. Bettmann, Corbus, Getty read more. French Foreign Minister Michel Debré and U.S. President Lyndon Johnson. Television coverage of the flight of the Saturn 1B rocket launching from Cape Kennedy, Florida, on October 11, 1968, in the White House office in Washington, D.C. Charles Gorey, AP read more. A heavy beard covers the face of astronaut Walter M. Schirra Jr., Apollo 7 commander, as he looks out the rendezvous window in front of the commander's station on the 9th day of the Apollo 7 mission on October 20, 1968. Apollo 7 was the first Apollo mission to carry a crew, and it made 163 orbits around the Earth in 10 days, setting the stage for Apollo 8, which was heading to the Moon. JSC, NASA read more. Apollo 8, the first manned mission to the Moon, entered lunar orbit on Christmas Eve, December 24, 1968. That evening, the astronauts, Commander Frank Borman, Command Module Pilot Jim Lovell, and Lunar Module Pilot William Anders, held a live broadcast from lunar orbit, in which they showed pictures of the Earth and Moon as seen from their spacecraft. Said Lovell, "The vast loneliness is awe-inspiring and it makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth." They ended the broadcast with the crew taking turns reading from the Book of Genesis. NASA read more.